Hello, everyone. It's Phil Jones from Projector Reviews, and joining me is Patrick Siebert from JVC. So, Patrick, how are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you, Phil.
So, today we're going to be talking about JVC projectors. They basically are dominating when it comes to premium projectors for home theater. But before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsors, AV Pro and Meridio, for helping us put on this year's Projection Summit, where we talk about all things dealing with projection systems, including projectors, screens, and even accessories. Today, we're going to be talking about JVC. I've had the opportunity to review both Procision and reference models, and they are both spectacular. A lot of times in a review, I try to say NZ7 is also called a RS2100. So people know that our impressions about one applies to the other. We've had the opportunity to review lots and lots of these projectors. I even had a chance to review the little MP5, which is the only lamp-based unit, and that unit was very good. I also had a chance to see it at the projector shootout at Value Electronics.
I unfortunately didn't get to go to that, but in that shootout, we won in every single category. And that includes the one that you just mentioned, the NP5 or the RS1100, mostly because of the contrast and the color gamut. For an inexpensive projector, that thing punches way above its weight class.
Yeah, and I will say that there's only a few projectors that compete against JVC when it comes to, contrast, native resolution, things like that. I will say that JVC kind of has the edge right now, and I think a lot of it has to do with you guys continue to improve the video processing, which we'll talk about in detail for HDR and SDR, and it's noticeable. I actually just finished the review on the NZ7, and I thought it was exceptional. You can't touch the black levels, of course. HDR is great, great optics, the list goes on and on. And for you people who don't know the code, an NZ7, it would also be an RS2100. In fact, I awarded it my Editor's Choice Award for home theater projectors under 15K. So basically, if you have under 15,000 bucks, this is the one to beat. I mean, there's some great other projectors, but this guy retails for even substantially less than 15,000 bucks, correct? How much does the 7 retail for?
It retails for 11,000, and currently at the time of the shooting, we had on promotion for 10,000.
Yeah, so amazing, absolutely amazing deal. And if you want to learn more about it, check out our review on Projector Reviews of the NZ7, and we've also done the NZ9, and we've done the MP5. So check out those reviews. So what we want to talk about is why do these things command such a premium price but deliver premium performance? And I think the heart of that is the DILA technology, the panels that are utilized. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, DILA is our direct drive image line amplifier, and it is essentially our version of LCOS. And we developed LCOS a long time ago, and we continue to improve on it. It's our magic sauce that provides much higher contrast than our competitors. It's to the point where competitors don't even really argue that we have higher contrast.
Yeah, exactly. You could spend a lot more, especially when it comes to something like a DLP, and get nowhere near the black levels that you would get on a JVC projector. And that's the thing that dazzles you, by the way, Patrick, is the first time you turn it on and the black bars are actually black. That's kind of, and the other thing too is you can tell when you turn on most projectors, the screen goes from being black in your room to being gray in your room. That tells you that that's the color, that is the blackest black you're gonna get, right? And this one, you turn it on, the blacks on the screen are still pretty much the blacks that they were when it was the projector wasn't on. The blacker the blacks are, the more vibrant the colors appear and things like that, and the ability to resolve shadow detail. Because a lot of times we talk about blacks, but the goal is not black. The goal is as dark black it's in the scene, but also being able to see all those little details. Like if you look at Patrick and I are both wearing dark shirts, it should be the shirt should be black, but you should see my unpressed wrinkles and everything else, Patrick's collar and his buttons and everything, because that detail is in there. You want to be able to see the details hiding in the shadows, not the fact that the scene is just black. And JVC projectors do a spectacular job with that. And I think that has to do a lot with the DILA, and it spoils you. Now, let's talk about this 4K thing. because there's not a lot of native 4K projectors out there. So say you get something like an MP5. MP5 would be native 4K. And this is, by the way, cinematic 4K. You know, what is it, 4096 by 2160? So it's even wider than what you can get, and even more pixels than what you can get in standard 4K UHD. So this is 8.8 million, you know, individual pixels. So the detail is insane, right? Now, then you step up to something like the NZ7 that we did that has the E shift, which gives you a noticeable improvement in resolution, and that's beneficial if you're trying to go bigger. And like I said, there's going to be content coming in 8K, and then you go up to E shift X, which allows you to, which actually increases the resolution even further to like 35 million visual pixels on screen. Now, 8K, there's not a lot of 8K sources yet, but I always say buy once, cry once. You know, you want to be prepared for the future. The nice thing about it, the JVC, is the upscaling means that if you're looking at 4K on a very large screen, like Patrick said, it's going to look great, and you're ready for 8K in the future. And also, Patrick, what about gaming? Let's talk a little bit about what else. Your inputs also allow you to take advantage of all of this projector's capabilities on the latest HDMI 2.1 stuff for gaming, correct?
Oh yeah, the NP5 or RS1100. It'll give you a 4K 120 input. It'll give you a 4K 120 output. Super low latency, really, really fast, low blur images. It's the resolution. It's the refresh rate that all the kids want, right? The higher that refresh rate, the more they can play that game, better it's going to look. So not only do we do 4K 120 input, even on the entry level DILA projectors, we also, you know, you can take that 4K input 60p that we're talking about before and turn it into 8K. So although you may not have that 8K that you mentioned now, you're going to get 8K just based off of the 4K information that you have. But it will take the 8K 60p input as well, the 4K 120. And then on our less expensive projectors that we should probably be talking about here in a second, that thing will do 1080 at 240 hertz resolution or refresh rate.
Exactly, which is, if you're a hardcore gamer, that's buttery smooth video gaming. So like I said, I had the opportunity to, you know, to play around. I have an Xbox and I have a PlayStation. So yeah, so we took I've taken the NZ9 that I had as well as the NZ7, and I played with it in the you know 4K 120 to make sure that you could do it, just because I wanted to play with it. And of course I don't had any video, but I do have a 7G test pattern generator. So I was like, can this thing actually accept 8K at 60 frames per second? Yes, it can. And when I had the NZ9, JVC was nice enough to actually loan me for a couple of days their gigantic media player. And it's pretty dazzling to see 8K on, I had 146 that we were using it on, and it's pretty dang impressive. And you could literally sit 6 feet from the thing, and it was just like you were in the room or in this particular space. So quite impressive. So major improvements. Like I said, the DILA has been kind of a mainstay. You guys have improved E shift. You went from E shift to E shift X. The other thing that really stood out is I love the projectors, and I've loved them for years, but they had a lamp in them, and lamps have only a certain amount of time on them. Now, you guys are solid state. So can you talk a little bit about BLU-Escent?
Our BLU-Escent laser light source in the DILAs, it's capable of doing 20,000 hours, and that's in high power mode. You're not going to watch everything that you watch on your projector in HDR content, which is what would deem the high power mode. Some of it's going to be SDR. Until they get football in HDR coming through my cable box, you're going to be watching a lot of stuff in SDR. And that number goes up even higher. But you get 20,000 hours of light, I almost said lamp source, of light source coming from your projector. So yes, it's fine. Let the kids play their video games on that projector. 20,000 hours, that's a long time, right? Like you're going to be interested in new technologies in 15 or 20 years, right? So 20,000 hours is going to last you a good long time. They're brighter because the laser light source obviously is a little bit brighter. And that started way back with our RS4500 when we introduced our first laser projector.
But you gotta remember that a few years ago, if you wanted a laser JVC, it was substantially more than what something like an NZ7 costs.
All that streams down from our simulation division, right? So this laser technology we've had for years in the simulation division, it's just really, really expensive. But as time goes by, we find we can build these a little bit more affordably, and that's why you're getting these, simulation military quality lasers in your JVC projector now.
Yeah, so like I said, I was really happy about that. Now there's a couple of things too. It's a big, these chassis are big, but there's a couple of reasons for that. One, there's a really big, really good lens in them, and a 3-chip DILA is gonna take up some room. And on top of that, I always say the bigger chassis allow bigger, slower moving fans, so the thing is quiet, because a lot of times they're over your head, and you don't want it to be woo the entire time. So it's a bigger chassis, but there's a reason for it. But the thing that stands out in the chassis that's in your face all the time is the lens assemblies. You guys, because you can have the best resolution in the box, the goal is to get that resolution on the screen. So can you talk a little bit about the lenses that you guys use?
Our DILA lineup, all those projectors have a motorized lens assembly, so you can have different presets as well. So you can go from 235 to 240 to 69 or whatever you need, providing that your screen's going to be able to support that, all built in with just 10 presets that you're going to have total control over. So those motors take up some space. That 100mm high polished all glass lens assembly, the thing is remarkably heavy if you ever picked up one of our JVC projectors. But this is the 100mm all glass lens that we use in the big guy. Yeah, it's big. So there's that, and like you mentioned before, those heat sinks in the projectors have become gigantic. Our processors are faster, and I'm sure we're going to touch on why we need fast processors here in a second too. And the laser generates more heat. We need to be able to have big aluminum heat sinks in there so we can dissipate that heat without having the fans run higher. I mean, that was always the thing. We always had fast processors, but our fans used to be louder. And people, oh, the fans are too loud. Now, unfortunately, the projector's the size of a Buick, weighs 100 pounds, but it is an amazing piece of technology, and we need those heat sinks to keep running cool and properly over a long period of time, just like we do in our simulator stuff.
Yeah, and you got to remember that if you did, like I said, if you did make the unit smaller and the fans louder, you'd have to build a quiet box for it, which would be bigger than the projector itself. So a lot of things, like the optics, like you mentioned a big thing, the optics are huge. I mean, and the motors you use for focus and zoom are insanely precise. It does take a little bit more time to zoom it in or shift it because the steps are really, are really subtle, but you can really dial in that picture. And I will say that there are other projectors out there that have picture positioning, the ability to change the zoom, focus, and position based on what aspect you're watching, but they aren't as precise. They kind of drift. And it's nice that when I go on my 235 screen from widescreen to 16:9, I know that once it does its thing, it's pretty aligned. I don't have to go in there and make any fine adjustments. So very precise motors, big optics. Anybody that's ever had a digital camera and saw those guys shooting, the sports photographers shooting with those gigantic lenses, big lenses, big glass lenses cost a lot, but they make sure that you get all the resolution either into the lens or out of the lens. And you do have to pay a premium for that. Let's talk a little bit about this in Frame Adapt HDR. What is it, and what have you done to improve it? Over to you.
So in the past, people have been complaining, oh, HDR is too dark. I can't get HDR to work properly in my system. It just doesn't look as good as it could. And then they go back to watching SDR. And that has changed in the last few years. The invention of auto tone mapping, the ability to get metadata off of your disk and be able to tell your projector or whatever your display is for that matter, what your brightest pixel is going to be and what your darkest pixel is going to be. And the display can kind of fine tune that. We've gone one step beyond that, which is incredible technology. And we continue to evolve this technology, but we do Frame Adapt HDR, which is a form of dynamic tone mapping, where we don't just take the metadata. Sure, we take the metadata, and we take the metadata from the HDR10+. We take all that information and we analyze each individual frame of the content to make sure the brightest pixels, the brightest it can be, the darkest pixels, the darkest it can be. And that's going to give you a more profound sense of depth, like I mentioned before. Not to mention, it's going to give you a wider color gamut, and you're not going to sacrifice every last bit of brightness that your projector can do. So be able to give you an HDR image that's got amazing black level, amazing brightness, and have that huge color gamut without sacrificing anything. That's the focus and the purpose of our Frame Adapt HDR.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the point that a lot of times you look at a HDR on a projector and they don't look good on a lot of projectors. You want to kind of just go back to watching it in SDR. And there's a reason for that. When they master content for consumer use in HDR, it's mastered for very, 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 very bright flat panels. You know, gigantic amount of brightness range. And now you're trying to take that massive amount of brightness range and utilize the limited brightness that a projector has. A projector can get bright, but if you compare it to what a LCD could do, which is 5 or 6 times brighter, it's a challenge to get all that information in there properly. And if you do it wrong, you end up with blown out highlights, the clouds use no detail, or Patrick looks like you can't see any details in his shirt, or the whole overall scene looks dark. And so the projector has to adapt itself to get the best look and as close to creator's intent as possible based on its capabilities. And the scene may go from super bright to super dark to in between, and the projector has to adapt. There isn't one, curve that will work for every scene in every movie. So the fact that the projector can change itself scene by scene or frame by frame means you're going to get better performance, and you don't find yourself playing with the little HDR adjustment thing on the projector between every time you're watching a movie 9 or 10 times. So it works really, really well. It's one of the few projectors that I will actually watch HDR on. Most of the time, I just go into my Apple TV or my Blu-ray player and set it to SDR if I'm gonna, because it doesn't look that good on most projectors. So kudos. So you guys continue to add stuff. It's almost like it's never good enough. So the first thing is you guys first introduce Frame Adapt HDR, and everybody said, "Wow, that's awesome! That's the best HDR I've seen on a projector." Then you came up with this other thing called Theater Optimizer. What is this?
The Theater Optimizer allows you to customize the projector for your particular theater. You tell it what your screen gain is, your screen material, the screen size. It figures out its throw distance, and then again, it fine-tunes itself for your home theater. It's not the same as an ISF certified calibration, but it does make some changes to it, and it makes those changes over the life of the light source, whether it be the lamp or the laser, depending on which one you have. But it'll start to change and evolve itself knowing how many hours are on that light source. So it's going to give you the very best possible image without being blown out, and you're giving it the information. This is what my theater is. I want to customize my theater, and it's going to give you your theater's best image that it possibly can.
So that was great. So Frame Adapt HDR, then they added Theater Optimizer, but they continue to advance the projectors. So that's the benefit of having a big, powerful video processor, is you can continue to add more and more stuff to it. I noticed this year there was another noticeable jump in performance, and that had to do with the last firmware update. Because I admit, I reviewed the NZ9 probably over a year ago, and it looked good. And then when I went to the projector shootout, it looked noticeably better.
So we're always trying to add things to the projectors that make your projector the best it can be before we make a model change or a style change. We feel like, all right, this is an emerging technology that we're going to be able to put into our new projectors, but we don't want you to have to wait 2 or 3 years. Plus, isn't it nice to be able to have a projector that continues to evolve with the technology that we can improve on? So every year we're trying to add whatever technologies we're going to add into our next model to the projector that you have already, and it's absolutely free. So you're able to take your projector and make little improvements along the way. Frame Adapt HDR was a massive improvement. It received huge reviews all over the place. The Theater Optimizer works very, very cool to be able to customize that piece for your home theater. And now we have the HDR Quantizer. So the HDR Quantizer really maximizes the color gamut per the actual source that you're utilizing. It works very similar to Frame Adapt HDR, but specifically with HDR color, and it's got multiple levels. So you're going to be able to utilize that quantizer to be able to kind of fine tune what you feel like is going to be the best image for yourself. the best color gamut without being too blown out. With, you know, some people, and God bless them, but some people like stuff that's a little saturated, maybe.
Mhm.
You'll find that there are people in the market that like to have the brightest screens and the craziest blues, and we can do that.
Mhm.
But if you want the more natural color, you can kind of fine tune with the HDR quantizer what you're actually going to get in the end. And that's an
Yeah.
algorithm that is based purely off the HDR metadata, or not metadata, but HDR data in the projector.
Yeah, and I actually played with the auto, so you can go in and you can fix it, or you can play with the auto, and the projector will make its adjustment. It'll choose kind of steps that it's going to apply based on what the content is being played in. And the normal and wide have their both look good, but they have different characteristics. I would say the wide is a little brighter, but if you want deeper blacks and a little bit more highlight detail, you may go to the normal. Which one do you want? Is the one that you like. They're not here to tell you what's right. They're there. This is an example of giving you options. The other thing that you added that I like is before you used to have one Frame Adapt HDR mode. But what if I wanted one for nighttime viewing and one for daytime viewing? That was kind of difficult. You'd have to go in and try to build your own, and it wasn't really possible. So now you have 3 Frame Adapt dynamic tone mapping based HDR presets for HDR. So that allows you to, if you wanted to have a nighttime mode and a daytime mode, or eventually and maybe HDR sports mode, you can actually do that in the future. So that was kind of a nice thing. Also, the other one, filmmaker mode. So talk about that.
Filmmaker mode is really a set of standards for when a visual engineer is looking at the movie and they're trying to do their own kind of color mix for that. It's a non-augmented, very flat, true to the engineer's input, right? It's like it's what they actually feel like color-wise, that color space is going to look the best for that movie and their intent. Now that's not always going to translate perfectly. That's why we like to have that on and off. But you know, when you're watching football, nobody's dialing this in filmmaker mode first, right? So you're going to want to utilize some of the auto functions of the rest of the projector. And the great thing about that, thank you for mentioning it, was with not only the Frame Adapt HDR, but also the quantizer, you can load that into one of the 10 presets, right? Mm-hmm. So you can have a preset for night mode that is maybe a little bit less bright and a little bit less saturation because your iris is all shut down and everything's perfect in that room. And then you can also do it for daytime mode where everything's as bright as it possibly can be. Or for animation, I find that animation really often can use a different level of Frame Adapt HDR because some of that stuff is really pop and zing, like to a point where you could use a little extra contrast and a little less brightness.
Now, the other thing you added was HDR10 Plus. What is this and how does it compare to regular HDR10?
So HDR10 Plus is the next evolution of HDR10. It does give you more precise metadata, and it does do it down to scene by scene even. So it just gives you more metadata throughout the entire disk to determine its algorithmic interpretation of what your color should be.
The last thing I want to talk about is let's talk a little bit about the models in more detail. So the top guy is the NZ9, your flagship. I will tell you, for $26,000, it actually won our premium projector award. You'd have to spend $50K to beat this thing. So kudos. And that's the only one with the big lens, right?
This is the only one that has a 100mm all glass lens, and that's really going to help with corner-to-corner resolution on big stuff. It also does have the AKE Shift X, which we kind of touched on already, and does 4K 120 like all of our DILA projectors.
Yep, the highest native contrast. We're not talking, it's 100,000 to 1 native, not dynamic, native, which is incredibly impressive. Then you add the dynamic dimming that you can do with a laser, and it's pretty much infinite. The other thing too, Patrick, that I'll point out is this is rated for 3,000 ANSI-lumens. A lot of projectors will do 3,000 ANSI-lumens in I will never watch it mode because it's greenish or it's just to get the spec. And this is not that way. You get the majority of that brightness even once it's calibrated. So a lot of times you'd have to buy a projector that had a rating of 5,000 ANSI-lumens to get a calibrated picture that would match this one. Let's just talk a little bit about the NZ8.
So your contrast goes down a little bit, you're moving to a 65 millimeter lens instead of the 100 millimeter lens. So you're going to lose a little bit of efficiency with that light source as well. So it's not going to be quite as bright. We're going on a 2500 lumens. But other than that, it's got eShift-X. It's got the color filter. It's got the same color gamut. It does 48 gigabits per second. So it'll do 8K 60. It'll do 4K 120. So it's very, very similar to the NZ9. It's just a little bit less bright, and it's meant for a little bit smaller images. And I mean a little smaller images. I'm not scared to do 160, 170 with this projector all day long in the right environment.
If we go down to the NZ7, the native contrast on here and the lens on here is still superior. Yes, and this pitch, like I said, is great. 2200 lumens, anti-lumens is more than enough for a 150-inch, screen. So Patrick, what does the NZ7 retail for?
It's $10,999.
Yeah, so, and at that price point, as you can see, we actually said under 15K, it is the one to beat. Now, most of your lineup, Patrick, is DILA, but you do offer a couple of DLP models, and we are actually just finishing a review on a new model to your lineup, new addition to your lineup, which is called the LX-NZ30. Is that correct for that model?
That is correct. It comes in black and white, so it's either an NZ30B or an NZ30W. It is a DLP projector. It does 4K DLP, so it is 4K addressable, but it is not native 4K. It does 3,300 lumens now, and it's a single chip design. So it's a whole lot easier to get that light level up to 3,300 lumens doing a single chip than splitting it among the 3 chips inside a 3-chip DILA machine. It does have mechanical lens shift, and it's a little bit further than most of our competitors. And it has an all glass lens assembly. And like I said before, it'll do 1080 at 240 hertz refresh rate for the gamer. So now you have an affordable projector that's really, really bright that you can have a 240 hertz refresh rate on.
Smaller, brighter, still throws out some great resolution. The picture quality and color accuracy is better than most DLP projectors that we have uncovered or reviewed or measured out of the box. A lot of win-win. A lot of the understandings of video that they've done from building these big guys also apply to this one. And this one is even more approachable. What's the retail price on this one?
This one's $3,500, $3,499.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a nice projector to start for your media room, entertainment room, this is a great solution. So Patrick, anything else you'd like to cover before I let you go?
Well, the only thing I really want to kind of touch on, one more thing, is our warranty and how we deal with any issues that you have. The incredible thing about the DILA product is it's got a 3-year warranty. If you have a problem, you call either customer service or myself, and we can't eliminate the issue over the phone with you, we ship you out a new projector. The customer is never without a projector.
So great lineup, great service, great performance, great quality. If you want to learn more, we've done several reviews over the past few years, and needless to say, we have nothing bad to say about them, and a lot of times they are the best in their class. And of course, to learn more about JVC and the projectors that they manufacture, check out jvc.com. So Patrick, thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you at CEDIA and seeing what other things JVC has up their sleeve.
Thank you for everything, Bob. I really appreciate it.
All right, so take care, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.